All right, I'm back. So we were just starting to talk about the women's suffrage movement. Well, what a lot of people don't know is that the women's suffrage movement didn't start with the 19th Amendment. It culminated in it. A struggle of over about 60 years since the 1860s before women universally gained the right to vote across the United States. This map, which is actually a primary source document, shows us the different dates that different states gave women full suffrage in their states. You can see Colorado was one of the earliest in 1893. The earliest state was actually Wyoming in 1869 to give women the right to vote. But a number of Western states who were young states at that time, such as Oregon, such as Washington, and California, were some of the first to follow Wyoming in giving full suffrage to women. Why was that? Well, in Oregon, the suffrage movement was led by Abigail Scott Duniway. And many people who supported the suffrage movement for women cited the hardiness of pioneer women who were instrumental in settling the West and in developing communities there. So it was the toughness of those pioneer women that convinced men that women too should have this equal participation. You can see that some of the last states who never on their own would have given women the right to vote, maybe not never, but they certainly weren't jumping on board with it, were a number of states across the South, and then a few like Maryland and Pennsylvania. Back to the Constitution. I'm going to move myself over to this corner so you can see the other side. So after the 19th Amendment, we have the 23rd Amendment, which finally granted people in the District of Columbia the right to participate in presidential elections. So I don't know if you knew that, but in the original Constitution, D.C. did not get to have suffrage. Then we have the 24th Amendment. In the century that followed the Civil War, racial tension persisted. 5 southern states still had a poll tax, which was eliminated by the 24th Amendment. The Supreme Court declared that even a $1.50 poll tax was an unfair burden, making people pay to vote. People had to pay at polling stations in order to vote. And who did that disenfranchise? Well, the poor, the poorest among us, and usually those, incidentally, were also people of color in the South. 1965, of course, these were both the culmination of the civil rights movement in the United States. The Voting Rights Act was passed after blacks were granted the right to vote in 1871. Literacy requirements, physical violence, we're talking about lynch mobs, property destruction, burning crosses, hiding the polls. Yes, they did that, and they still move them to sometimes very difficult to reach locations. And economic pressures, again, those poll taxes and such, still kept many blacks from being able to exercise their voting rights, especially in the South. In some states, a voter could vote in primary elections only if his grandfather had been able to vote in primaries. Other states only allowed whites to vote in primaries. The Voting Rights Act was enacted in direct response to the civil rights movement. This act bans literacy tests, forcing people to prove that they can read and write, and provides federal enforcement of voter registration and voting rights. It basically means that there has to be federal oversight of all of the states in the South that have been limiting voter participation. They get federal oversight over those states' election laws. 1971, of course, was the year during the Vietnam War when the 26th Amendment was passed, granting American citizens the right to vote if they were 18 or older. Many Americans felt it was unfair to send citizens in to fight a war that they didn't have the right when they didn't have the right to vote for their representation. 1975, the Voting Rights Act gets reauthorized. This is very important. Most adult citizens in the U.S. had the right to vote based on provisions in the Constitution by this time. Congress amended the Voting Rights Act in 1975 to include language for minority voters' assistance, who could not vote if ballots and instructions were only available in English. So it actually made it available to people who were non-English speakers. And then finally, in the year 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, addressed the need for physical access to the ballot box for Americans who had handicaps or physical disabilities. It wasn't until the 1990s that that happened. Let's take a look at this fabulous handout. It highlights some of the other things that we may not have discussed yet in the history of American voting. I'm going to move myself over here again. So originally in 1776, white men with property could vote, but what you might not have known is that free black men could also vote at that time in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. Now, that was later amended in 1810 to make it so that no black men could vote, but in the original colonies, some black men did have participation rights. It was 1790 Naturalization Act that originally tied the right to vote to your citizenship status. And then there was the Mexican-American War, which ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which made all of those former Mexicans who became Americans, American citizens, but denied them the right to vote even though they were citizens. And it would be until 1975 that all Mexican Americans gained the right to vote. So a very long time. Also, you should note that after the Civil War, when the 14th and 15th Amendment extended citizenship rights and the right to vote to former slaves, they did not include Native Americans at that time. It excluded native-born Native Americans. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 also barred people of Chinese ancestry from becoming citizens and therefore the right to vote. And then we later went on in 1922 in this case, Takao versus United States. It denied all Asian Americans and all Asian immigrants the right to become citizens and vote. So it took a very long time before that was repealed up until the 1940s. So you see, we have a long history of denying people the right to vote in this country, and it ties in with the struggles for civil rights and equal rights that really have defined our country. So let me show you just really quickly before I run out of time again, the other articles that I'd like to have you read. That's the history lesson. These articles have to do with current issues in voting rights, which I would like you to consider and then respond to. So the first one is about ex-felons, whether Americans who have a felony on their record should ever regain the right to vote. As you can see by this graph, the United States has the world's largest incarceration rate. In fact, many times larger than the rest of the developed nations in the world. So we incarcerate a really high percentage of our citizens. And so this affects a lot of people, this issue of whether felons get to the right to vote. And it's decided right now on a state-by-state basis. Only 2 states actually allow felons to vote fully while in jail, and they are Vermont and Maine. A number of felons, 9 states don't allow ex-felons to vote at all. One of them, Florida, actually changed their laws 2 years ago in the midterm elections through a ballot measure initiative to allow a number of non-violent ex-felons to regain the right to vote. So that was a major win for voting rights in Florida. An estimated 6.1 million adults were not allowed to vote in the 2016 presidential election because of these felony laws. So this article has a lot of great data for you to read and consider and look at how this affects different people across our country in different states with the different laws, and how it overall affects our elections, so that you can decide whether you think more or less ex-felons should be able to vote. The next one I know you guys will feel strongly about is the push to lower the voting age to 16, which I know high schoolers always feel different ways about. 16-year-olds, that's like letting sophomores vote. Yes, I suppose it is, but again, we do let them drive and work and have relationships and lots of other things. So in a number of places, 16 and 17-year-olds are being allowed to vote already in local elections, like our municipal elections or state elections in some places, as sort of like a test run for it. So read about that and see what you think. Voter Laws Roundup compares the different voting laws that are in place or being put into place by bills and legislation in different states across our country. So you can see what are the more difficult and less difficult places to vote. We're actually in a rock star state because, like I said, Oregon invented vote by mail, which makes it really easy because you can literally just put the envelope in your mailbox and send it off. A lot of people have to take off work on voting day in November. They have to take off work. They have to stand in long lines at polling stations. I am actually old enough to remember when we had to do that in Oregon. When I was a little kid, I remember lining up in polling stations inside churches and gymnasiums and waiting in the long, boring lines for my parents to stand in a booth and get to plug in their ballots. So it's been interesting to see how vote by mail has really changed the voting culture in Oregon, and it's caught on in a lot of different places. So what are different states doing as far as their voting laws? And then here are the questions I would like for you to answer. And again, I have attached them in a separate document on our Teams page, Voting Rights Priorities. So this is where you get to think and analyze and synthesize what you've read about and what you understand about these voting rights issues in our country. And you get to give an opinion and take a stand on them. So how do you think Oregon should expand voting rights? Should we allow younger people to vote? Should we allow less people to vote? And then, of course, give a rationale, give a reasoning for your position. Are there any restrictions on voting rights that you think will affect Oregonians who want to vote in 2020? And finally, what is your opinion about lowering the voting age? Please explain your reasoning. So that's all we're doing for this week. Next week, we'll actually get into gerrymandering and how it affects voters' rights. Gerrymandering is interesting and a little bit complicated to explain, so I'll have some video links for that. And of course, I've got a couple of readings here for you as well. All right, that's all for today, folks. I hope that this was informative. It was fun for me. I look forward to seeing you in our first live session Zoom chat next week. I'll be sending out the invite for that on our Teams page. And if you have any questions or any difficulty, please feel free to message me on Teams or send me an email. All right, take care.